Welcome, and thank you for joining us in part two of this important webinar series. My name is Elizabeth Hind, and I'm Dean of the School of Education here at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Some of you participated in part one last week when we were interrupted by technical issues halfway through, but we had covered a lot of information. Since then, believe it or not, much has changed in the early childhood world in just 1 week. The issues of equity and justice have intensified across the country and certainly in the state. And pertinent to this webinar, more early childhood centers have opened and revised guidelines have been put forth. So again, this session is vital, and we thank you for joining us and for caring so deeply about our youngest and most vulnerable learners. Before we get started, during the webinar, we welcome your questions and comments and ask that you please post any questions you have for the panelists or others in the Q&A feature. As the second largest teacher preparation program in a university in Colorado, the School of Education feels a deep sense of commitment to and responsibility for not only exposing inequities that negatively impact children, but we also are committed to working to negate these inequities and to make the lives of children and families better through our schools and educational centers. Many of the ways we are working toward that end, we have established a trauma-informed practices initiative, whereby all students who matriculate through our programs are engaged with learning how to address the needs of children impacted by trauma. We recognize that our youngest learners are the most vulnerable, and that's what this workshop is all about. With generous funding from a number of local organizations, we are able to provide this trauma-informed practices training to our students. One such organization, the Buell Foundation, whose president and CEO, Susan Steele, is here to moderate this session. Under Susan's leadership, the Buell Foundation has become a champion and true friend of early childhood education. We are honored and grateful to have Susan with us. So I hand the floor to you, Susan.
Well, thank you so much, Dean Hind. It's very nice to be back again, part two, and yet the same and yet very different this week for sure. I think that we continue to see change, rolling things happen of high magnitudes every week, every day. The change by itself, of course, often causes trauma for many of us that like it to go a little smoother, but that's not the case right now. And I think very specifically, we need to think about change as it relates to the COVID situation and the childcare and how that affects the kids, the parents, the providers, the directors, everyone that's in this mix together. And that's part of what this webinar is about today. We are going to have with us several notable people in the field, and starting with Dr. Dorothy Chaplin, who is an assistant professor at Metro State, 30 years of experience in the classroom and various entities, and currently is a trauma-informed and early education professor at the university. Dorothy is also a graduate of our Buell Early Childhood Leadership Program, a Bueller, as we say, and so we're very proud of her and happy to have her here today. Dr. Rosemarie Allen, a longtime colleague, we have worked together for many years, is an associate professor at Metro State University, who has served in a leadership role in early childhood education for many, many years, 30 years herself, it says. Her life's work is centered on ensuring that children have access to high-quality early childhood education programs that are developmentally and culturally appropriate. We also have, as a special guest, Anna Joseph, who is with Metro State. Let's see, she has a really long title here, the Director of Trauma-Informed Practices at Metro State University, Denver School of Education. Anyway, another expert in the field who's going to help us with some answers and moderating the questions coming through the chat. We're happy to have her here and maybe give us some insights towards the end of this webinar. We also have different perspectives at the table today. Vijay Raman is a parent of 2 young children, also serves on the board of a school, private school in Parker, an early childhood a place for early childhood education, and has been living through both sides of that equation during this COVID situation. We also had planned for, and were able to meet with for a few minutes last time, a student panelist, a student from the university who is also currently teaching in an early childhood center. Well, as luck would have it this week, she's busy teaching, so she's not able to join us. But I think we will be able to get some of her perspective into the conversation from some of the things she told us last time she was here, and hopefully draw from some of your experiences too in the audience. So that's our group today. We're really looking forward to the conversation. I think then that we are going to get started here with Dr. Rosemarie Allen. Rosemarie, you gave us some really important information last week about what it's like to be, has been like to be in a COVID classroom or in a COVID center, and very meaningful and still meaningful, but yet it's all changed with the changes in the rules since last week. So please bring it back, bring us up to where we are. Rosemarie?
Thank you so much, Susan. And as you all are well aware, things have changed tremendously in a week. We have, since our last webinar, received new guidance from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And I just want to remind those who are in the field, who are working, that this is your #1 source for information. It is updated regularly as new things come up and come out. This website is updated, so this is what you want to use as your source of information. So let's see what some of those changes are. Last week we were constrained to 10 children per group per room, and now child care facilities may operate under their licensed capacity and group size. So this means that you have to refer back to your licensing rules and your licensed capacity. If you are wondering what that looks like, your capacity is listed on your child care license that was given to you when you first got started. So those capacities for room size and group size are now in force. And again, even with scaling up to full capacity, the state wants you to prioritize care for children of essential workers and those who are looking for work. We know that scaling up is going to take a minute. It's going to take a while to scale up your children and to scale up your staff. So keep in mind that those essential workers are to be prioritized. And still, the state wants you to keep groups of children together with the same teacher as much as possible. We know how hard that is. We know that many childcare facilities have work 12-hour days. So in some cases, it will be impossible to have the same children with the same teacher for all those hours. But as much as you can, because that does decrease the spread of COVID, as much as you can, conduct temperature checks and monitor symptoms daily. Again, and I'll talk about this later, we know that there is difficulty in getting thermometers right now. But as much as you can, conduct those temperature checks and watch children for any symptoms. And again, we're early childhood. We're not new to hand washing. We've been doing it for a long, long time, singing that ABC song twice. But now we're asking you to really make sure that children wash their hands upon arrival and many, many times throughout the day. The next recommendation is, let's go back just one. The next recommendation is the absolute hardest. And I can't tell you I know how to do this, but that's encouraging 6 feet of distancing for young children. And also, you know, we're in our daily routine, we have our meal times at the same time. They're asking that you stagger meal times and encourage individual plating. And that is counterintuitive to us as early childhood people because we work so hard on family meal settings. But right now during this time, we're asking that you stagger those meal times and plate the children's meals. And limit the toys in use to those you can easily clean. And again, this is counterintuitive because we ask that you have lots of textures and lots of smells and all of this, but I think we're going to be using plastic for a little while because it's just easier to disinfect. So that's for our workspaces. Let's look at our next slide and look at some of the recommendations for employees. So we're asking facilities to require the use of face masks or coverings, the medical grade if available. They are becoming more and more available, especially through outlets such as eBay and Amazon.com and some of your medical supply stores. I was even at Ace Hardware and they were selling medical grade masks there. And also to provide guidance and encouragement to maintain the 6 feet distancing. What's not here that I think would make it a little bit easier is really increasing outside play as much as we can. This weather is amazing. That will help as well. And providing guidance on hand washing, training all staff so that they're aware of the public order, and even perhaps giving them the website so they can look it up for themselves. You must require staff to stay at home when they are sick or they have signs of sickness. And really, really important is to make sure that staff have the resources they need in order to meet their mental health needs. This is a tough time for us, and there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of stress. This, in addition to everything else that's going on in the world right now. Let's look at further guidance to protect children and parents. The state is asking that you implement an alternative check-in and check-out procedure. Many facilities are having the drive-up procedure where families are not coming into the center. You can have them sign in using their own ink pens. This is very tough for families because it's hard to drop your child off and not see where they're going, and to pick them up and not know how they were doing. So as we're being very creative with these alternative check-in and out procedures, also be creative in how you keep families up to date with the happenings throughout the day that's taking place with their children. Require families to keep their children home if a child has a stuffy nose or a fever or seems congested. And encourage families to take their children's temperature before they bring them into care. They may need some guidance on that and guidance on how and where to purchase thermometers. For facilities to provide face coverings or masks for children who are older than 3. But we're asking that you not allow them to wear the mask during nap time, or children who are younger than 3, they shouldn't be wearing masks either. So provide frequent communication with families about the public health order, but also about their child and how they're doing and what they're doing. That's more important now than ever before, because again, they're not coming into the facilities. They're not seeing who their children are with all day. So I think families will be really appreciative of that frequent communication.
And Rosemary, we have a comment that came in. I just wanted to see if you wanted to speak to it at all. It's just there. This is from Karina Crandall, just saying the directors I am in contact with feel like not a lot has changed because they do not have the square footage to meet physical distancing requirements for naps and meals to operate at capacity, and feel like this is very misleading.
Yes, I understand the frustration with that. I don't have the answer for it though. This is changing every day. I do know that the governor is very committed to get facilities up and running because we know the hardship that is posing for families and for providers. So I don't have the answer, except I know that these policies are being reviewed every day. Both Susan Still and I are on a weekly call called COVID and ECE, and we're trying to stay up to date. These are concerns that we can bring up to all of the committees and boards that we sit on to make sure that the increased capacity is truly an increased capacity while also protecting children and families. I appreciate that comment. Thank you. So as we're looking at COVID and making sure that children and families and providers are protected, we have to be aware of the equity issues and the access issues that are taking place right now, especially when there are so many conflicting priorities. And as I believe it was Karina said, that while the guidance is that we can increase capacity. The room size may not allow us to fully accept all the children that we're licensed for. So as you're trying to figure out which children to accept, we want you to be mindful of those who are most vulnerable and at risk. So those are children who are receiving subsidy. Those are your children who are on CCAPs and CPP, and children with special needs who may have an IFSP or an IEP who need the services. Children with challenging behavior, that's going to be very important that they have some consistency and a schedule. And children who have experienced trauma, and Dorothy is going to go into that in depth later on. I do want us to be very aware of the impact of the protests that are taking place right now and the trauma that results from that. And again, Dorothy will go into that later. And as we're thinking about equity and access, we have to be aware and be ever so mindful of implementing culturally responsive practices. These children have been home for a while. I've been home since March 13th, believe it or not. But it has been a challenge, and it has also been beautiful to be here. Be mindful of the cultural environment that children are coming from, that they have been totally immersed in the most culturally appropriate environment because it's their home. They've been able to speak their language and keep their routines and have all this interaction with their mom and dad and pets. And they have been able to eat their food and be free to be who they are. So we're asking you to be aware of that cultural environment at home so that you can make wonderful connections between the home and the school. Children shouldn't have to change who they are when they come into our environment. Children should be able to be who they are at school the same way they are at home. So be mindful of that and partner with families to develop activities that will meet the child's cultural needs. And earlier, as Dr. Hine opened, she talked about the issues that we're facing today. Even last week, things were not as heightened as they are right now. So issues of race and racism and equity and fairness have come up a lot. And children know, and they are hearing things. Sometimes we think children don't know and they hear, but they hear and know a lot more than we ever thought, than we want to believe. So it's never too early to talk to children about race. We have to start young because children notice race very, very early. They notice differences very early. So we have to acknowledge, celebrate, and honor those differences. And we ourselves as adults must develop a comfort level in talking about race, because what we tend to do is shush children. I was at the supermarket not long ago, and this young guy rounded the corner and almost bumped into me. And he went, "Hey, you're black." And I said, "I am, and you're white, and you have blue eyes, but my eyes are brown." And he goes, "My eyes aren't brown." I said, "No, my eyes are brown. Your eyes are blue." And it was just a casual conversation. And I was so glad that his mom was a few steps back because of my fear that she would shush him because she's uncomfortable. So as early childhood professionals, we have to develop this comfort with talking about race in very casual ways. But when we talk about justice and racism and injustice, we can frame that in terms of fairness. Children in our facilities, our young children, they understand fairness and what's fair. Young children understand racial justice when we say, this happens when someone treats someone else because of the color of their, someone else differently because of the color of their skin. Is that fair? So when you frame these conversations about justice and inequity, talk about fairness and discuss the importance of not treating other people unfairly because of the color of their skin. And also, we have to address current issues, and this is hard. How do you talk to children about what's happening today? And it's really, really important that you speak at the child's developmental level. So at 3 years old, a child may not be able to understand that because of the color of Mr. Floyd's skin, the police officer kept his knee on his neck and he died. But figure out what they know and speak to them at that level. Just going back to our stages of development, making sure that we're using some of that language and some of those strategies. They still work when you speak to children about race and current events. One of the most important things is that we want to avoid this colorblind ideology. Some of us have been taught and are very comfortable with saying, oh, I don't see children, I don't see race, I just see children. We see race. You see race. You can't avoid it. We all see color. It's okay to see it. It's just not okay to treat people differently in a negative way because of it. Just like the little guy at the supermarket when he said, hey, you're Black, that wasn't offensive at all. He noticed. And if you're working with 3 and 4-year-olds, you know that they noticed everything. Your breath smells like coffee, teacher. Why did you wear those shoes today? You wore those yesterday. You have a new hairstyle. They notice everything. You're Black, you're white. No, I'm more pink. You speak a different language. Talk about it. And lastly, it's extremely important that we promote empathy and not sympathy. So you do this by asking children how they would feel if they were treated unfairly. Can they remember a time when that happened to them? Discourage children from feeling sorry for other children, because that creates this superiority that we don't need more of. That's what exists in society today. So we want to teach children to empathize rather than feeling sorry for their classmates. So in terms of equity and access, we also have to be aware of facilities that can't scale up. As mentioned today, they don't have the physical space to scale up. They may not have the funds, because what happens if you are working with children from 3 to 6, your group size is 10, so that's 1 to 10. What happens when you have 15 children? You have to add that second adult, and you may not have the funding that will support that. So let's be aware of facilities that are struggling. We know that the more affluent facilities with more cash reserves, and then there are facilities that are supported by multiple funding streams. So this is also a concern. So how do we support children, families, staff? We have to make sure that our people are paid sick leave. If you are already struggling and you've been out of work for a while, if you don't have sick leave, chances are that you'll try to come to work sick. And that's not something we want. So sick leave, paid sick leave is very important. The early childhood workforce is subjected to the same rules around PPE as everyone else. But if we designated our workforce as essential, then perhaps they can buy more than 2 gallons of milk, more than 2 bottles of alcohol, more Clorox wipes, because there are limits on how many you can buy, and the need is great. So if we can designate our early childhood workforce as essential, then they can get a pass to purchase more of these items they so desperately need. Provide more information on COVID-19 testing. We know the Pepsi Center is open to everyone. We know that people who were out protesting are asked to take the test right away now, that within 3 days, I believe, of their last protest. And I just want to say, I received a call from a provider saying that she was going to deny services to a family because she knew they were out protesting. We can't discriminate. And they said, well, they're high risk. I had another family call that their provider refused services to them because the mother was an emergency room doctor. Tread cautiously here so that we're not discriminating against people, because we don't know their activities. And in some of these situations, especially the emergency room doctor, they're probably following protocol at a much higher rate than a family who's going to the park or not wearing masks and things like that. So be very careful not to discriminate against families based on their activities. And also provide resources for mental health services, and then have your substitutes ready. So if a staff member becomes ill, we need a substitute database so that our facilities can be covered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosemarie. Words of wisdom for sure. And at least 3 different areas that I heard that I wanted to highlight. One is the idea of this is now the return to normalcy. I mean, that's sort of the indication here. We're back to ratios, we're back to all of these things. And yet, as was pointed out in the chat, for those folks that are providing those services, we are anything but normal right now, trying to figure out how to provide services to all the families that need them, following your guidance as to a fair and equitable way to do that, but also just trying to figure out some families aren't ready to come back. Do I have to save a slot? How do I work around this mat problem? Do I buy partitions between? I mean, it's just maybe we're working back towards what normalcy, but nothing about this is normal. And I think that sort of just feeds into this constant change, which creates tension, which creates all of the stress, which also translates to trauma. And so bringing that all back around to working in the right direction, but still very much living with it. Talking to folks, whether it's kids or adults, in these ideas of equity and race. I heard a lot of ideas for kids that probably made a lot of sense in adult conversations that I hope we'll think about when we're moving forward. And I think just being very aware of the fact, those suggestions you made around serving our folks, our people that are on the front lines doing this work, the things like family leave, the things like a substitute pool, those are things we've needed for a very, very long time. And so I think it just reinforces how do we become strong advocates and find ways for us to be able to support the professional needs of these providers. So thank you very much. A lot to think about. And again, a lot of it since last week, for sure. I want to move on to a different perspective, and I want to move on to our parent, VJ, who has been very mindful and aware of this COVID situation. As I said, as a parent, homeschooling, taking care of young children with his wife, at the same time recognizing how it affects a school, an early childhood school where he's on the board. So I'm hoping that, VJ, you can take a few minutes and sort of walk us through sort of as it began, in the midst of it, now that it's changing a little bit, what's it been like for you? What's been your reaction to all of this?
Yeah, Susan, thanks for having me on the panel. Like Susan mentioned, I'm a dad to like 2 young boys, and my wife and I, we are privileged to work remotely. So there's been kind of a lot of challenges as we entered the pandemic, and then we are going through the pandemic now, and things are starting to come back up. And also as a board member, we have had some concerns with regard to like how do we handle closure of schools and stuff. I mean, overall, the theme has been that it's been very uncertain, and it's been very fluid, and so we have always had to be on our feet all the time, not just as a parent, but also as a board member. We have been having to like frequently kind of reflect on things and come up with some solutions, try different approaches, and see what works, what doesn't, and go forward from there. And the biggest challenge, like as parents, that we have, or how do we keep the kids, entertained during this time, and also limiting some of the screen time that they're receiving. And so we just have to be creative for some of these things, and I'm sure everybody is adapting in a different way. I mean, we've been more heavily investing on board games and crafts, and then older sibling helping the younger one, and coming up with some reward system. I mean, we did have some system before, but we've become a little bit more generous with rewards, like some smaller ones that kids like to. Like you go to the haircut salon, you get these little goodies, or you go to the doctor, you get these goodies. So we got a bag of those, and we're trying to kind of encourage them, like keep them entertained and encourage good behavior. That's kind of the biggest challenge is, keeping them entertained throughout the day. And then there's also like definitely like conflicts that arise, when you have kids at home, and just being more mindful and being more flexible with your rules and, your expectations, and, being more forgiving and being more mindful is really the key there that we found works. I've been reading this book, like How to Talk to Kids. I know I read it a while back, but I'm starting to read that up again because it's, as parents, I feel I need some guidelines to, how to handle this, and, just trying to find ways to improve myself as a parent, and, come up with some system that works. Let's see. And also the other questions that I don't have answers for, or, my kids kind of have had this prolonged holiday, kind of like, or staying at home at least. They're going to virtual school, but still they're at home. They eat at a different time now than school, and they're eating different meals than they eat at school. And so I do have concerns, or how are they going to behave when they go back to school? So these are questions that I don't have answers to. And also, like, with these new rules, especially with social distancing and not being able to mingle with other friends, as they used to during their lunchtime or break time, or even during classroom period, how are they going to handle those situations? So that's a concern I have as a parent. And then I'm also concerned with my younger one, who's actually changing schools right now. So he's going from a preschool to a school, like a kindergarten type situation. So I'm concerned how he's going to, handle the change, especially because, it's in general stressful changing schools, but now there's this additional burden on young kids to adapt with social distancing measures, and then not having the same amount of like fun they used to have in the regular school environment. So I'm concerned that hopefully he doesn't feel school's boring, the new school's boring. And I hope that the teachers can come up with, creative solutions to keep, schools still fun and entertaining. And then from a board member point of view, I have concerns with returning kids coming back to the preschool and expecting their old school scenario where they get to play with all the toys that are there. They get to like share things with each other. So now those things are going to change because they can be sharing toys or whatever the mandates are from the the education department. So we need to follow those things. So those are the concerns I have. Like when kids return back to school. And then this is a good segue to like from the board point of view is I'm concerned as a board member on the safety and well-being of children and staff first and foremost. And I'm glad Dr. Rosemary talked about some of those pointers from the recent changes. And I know Ms. Dorothy is also going to cover some of those aspects later. So I'm looking forward to hearing to those. So it's their concerns with staffing, their concerns with space. Like we are a really small school in Parker. We literally have like two rooms where we have 15 kids in each room and the appropriate ratio of staff for that. Now we have to distance, or actually 30 kids, let me take that back, 30 kids in each room. So if we have to like have a smaller subset of group, we don't have the space. So we'll have to find creative ways of space. We have a, like a basement area that we use for art and, like fun stuff. So maybe we have to make use of that now. So there are a lot of challenges that arise from it. So it's, like I said earlier, it's a very fluid situation right now. And so, what we have been doing as a board, like a team of board members is we used to meet every month to discuss these issues concerning the teachers and the parents, but now we are almost meeting every week. So because information is flowing in, we have to adapt quickly. And we also recently started a online chat, like a Slack conversation, so that we can all like have real-time communication with each other as we need to like solve these problems as they arise quickly. And the other one is this one's pretty big. I'm also concerned about the stress level of the staff and the teachers. We want to make sure that, because everybody's doing the best in this day, like to kind of, with the virtual school and then planning for new school and the uncertainty in general. And so everybody's been chipping in the way they can. Everybody's learning these new technology to do virtual school, come up with new curriculum so that we can keep kids at a safe distance. There's a lot of, flux in the space, and everybody is doing their best. So, as a board member, my concern is how do we keep my staff and the teachers, like give them, basically reduce the stress level. How do we keep them, give them the space to operate? So we are talking about finding ways to maybe give them more time off or, any pay raises or whatever we could do. We are a nonprofit, so we don't have a lot of funds, but we have to come up with some creative ways. Like we were talking about, like sending thank you notes to the director of our school and things of that nature. So that's another concern we have, being a board member. And then the other one is increasing costs. Like there's increasing costs related to cleaning supplies now is going to add to the monthly bill. And then there's also a potential of reduced income flow for the school, mainly because there may be a lot of parents who are out of work, or they just decided to homeschool because they're concerned of their kids' safety, or in general, it's just the worst situation we can be right now in terms of income and expenses. So we're trying to come up with solutions to handle the financial stress this is putting on schools, especially nonprofit ones, and also making sure that all the students get the same level playing field. We don't want to turn away a student because they can't make the tuition. We have always been helping parents. We want to continue doing the same, but how do we do that while still being financially viable? So these are the challenges we have. Some of these we don't have an answer to right now. And I'm sure from a teacher's point of view, there are other challenges they have in their minds, such as how do we make school fun? How do we make it creative? And still safe. And then do we want to make kids like a germaphobe, right? None of us want that to happen. We want a generation of kids who are still sharing, being kind, being able to collaborate, and we don't want to take that quality away. So how do we do all this in a safe way? These are some of the concerns that we are trying to address as we enter this reopening phase. And then last but not least, communication. So how do you respectfully tell parents that, hey, you know what, if your kid's sick, you have to stay back. Sorry, we can't take your kid. We know that you have this important thing in your office or workplace, but this is the rule. We can't help you with it. How do we communicate that and, still provide all the other kids and teachers a safe place to work? So there's a lot of open questions here, and yeah, those are the things I face day to day, Susan. So I hope that gives you some good perspective into being a parent and a board member.
Thank you so much. I think those two perspectives, it's very interesting as we start to talk about different perspectives that each of us in whatever role we're playing has a lot going on, a lot to think about, a lot of choices to make, a lot of concern or even fear about health and safety. And it doesn't matter about your role. It clearly is a part of what we're all thinking about. I was interested to hear some of the things from the board perspective that are it's so important that the board is aware of things like stress levels. And from my accounting background, income flow is going to turn out to be a really important thing here to be able to keep our centers in business. And certainly as a parent, the responsibilities both during and going forward. Just had met with my dentist earlier this week who has 5 children from age 5 to 18, and imagine the homeschooling that entailed. So some very interesting challenges. And unfortunately, Jordan Clothier couldn't be with us, who is a teacher down in Parker and also a student in ECE at Metro, but she did relay some very interesting stories last week about, for example, they were open during the emergency And she was in a classroom of 6 children, 3 younger children and 3 younger school-age children. So her challenge, think back to the one-room schoolhouse, was how to integrate, several different levels of learning at the same time going on. During nap time, how did you make time for the kids that were online to do their studies? How did you have enough lighting for them to be able to see their screens? And how did you coordinate activities outside when they're very different? Those were some examples. And then they were just beginning to consider or bringing in the 10-to-1 ratio. And that situation, then it's like stop, change, go back now. The good news is I get to work with my age group, and she is in love with kindergarten, and that's her normal age group. So she was able to go back to what was more normal, kindergarten kids, a group of kindergarten kids, and then surprise, now they're going to be a whole bunch more, which is great, but the situations are very different because of the circumstances. So I think ongoing challenges, certainly from that point of view as well. And some of you on the webinar today, if you have a comment on that or a quick question around that, or if you particularly can talk from the provider point of view, we'd love to have you drop that into the chat. So if we have a little bit of time later, we can talk through some of those experiences that you all have had. In the meantime, I think that we are ready to talk about some strategies moving forward. So Dr. Dorothy Chaplin, as I introduced before, is a professor down at MSU, lots of experience in this world over the years. And Dorothy, why don't you get started on some ideas that we can do?
Sure. So one of the things that we want to think about is the fact that trauma is real. We have lots of children that have experienced traumatic stress, chronic stress. But right now, we are all experiencing stress to a certain degree. And depending on our own backgrounds, adults and children alike, the trauma that we bring is compounded by the trauma the stress that we're experiencing right now, being under stay-at-home orders, safer-at-home orders, especially all of us in the childcare world that have been back and forth. Do we stay open? Do we close? Do we close and then reopen? How can we afford to do these things? All of these issues are stressful, not just on directors, but on providers in the field, teachers in the field that are concerned. Am I going on unemployment? Am I being furloughed? Am I keeping my job? Will I have it next week? All of those concerns on top of going into centers and working in centers and being afraid for their own health and safety, the health and safety of their families that they go home to. Can they afford to not keep the job? This is stress, right? So all of us, everyone, no matter whether you're working at home and you have the privilege, as VJ said, of being able to work remotely, or whether you are waiting to go back to work, or at any number of different situations, we are under a lot of stress. Our current stress is mainly due to certain things that impact all of us, right, in our nature. So a lack of predictability is a really difficult thing to deal with, right? That we don't know what's coming, that these rules keep changing, that every day there's some new information that comes out and some new factor that we haven't considered. And that lack of predictability is really stressful and difficult. It's worse for some than others, right? So people that are really planners and that like to have control over what's coming next are really at a loss right now and struggling with that. Some of the things that we can do is to stick to schedules, to provide our children with schedules. Not that everything in their lives have to be scheduled, but just knowing that Wednesday is the day that we FaceTime call with our friends down the street, and knowing that on Friday we're going to have that big Zoom call with all of the family on. Those kinds of things really help us to feel like life is a little bit more predictable. I know I have fallen into routines on a daily basis. There's certain things I do, some of them not so good. Laying in bed for an hour flipping through my phone is probably not the best routine, but it's a routine, and it's something that I've fallen into as a habit, but it helps to feel like life is a little bit predictable. I know at this time I'm going to go and sit in this place and do these things, and that really helps us. Our immobility is a big stressor, right? Getting out, using your body, going for walks, going for runs, depending on what you do, going for a bike ride, just being out of doors is helpful. Moving is helpful. Feeling trapped is a real stressor. Our loss of connection is really major. It's difficult for children. It's difficult for adults, right? To feel that we are not connected. That's an essential for children to build relationship, and everything we know, everything in early childhood is centered in relationship. So feeling disconnected is really difficult. We all need to be seen, and we all need to be heard. So going on webinars, going into Zoom chats, FaceTiming with people, whatever it is that you're doing, to be seen, to be heard. For children, how many of our children have been on Zoom school, right, or virtual school of some kind, and grabbed to the screen, right, lunged for the screen? That's that need for connection, right? Our children need to feel that they're being seen and they're being heard, and that's really important as we start back into classrooms, and we start to recognize that these children desperately want to lunge at you and each other and hug, and we have to be prepared. How are we going to handle that and support that connection without endangering them further? There's always going to be an amount of risk involved in reopening or staying open. There's a certain amount of risk and exposure, and we have to recognize that that's the truth. We cannot eliminate risk, but we have to be aware of how are we going to support these different things with children. Numbing out is another stressor, right? It is difficult for your body. It is difficult for your mind and your emotions to handle stress when we numb out. And it is definitely something that a lot of people are going to. That choice of having wine for breakfast really might not be the best way to handle this stress. Being aware, doing different things, right, to maintain our sense of self, stopping and noticing what's happening is really helpful. Choosing to stay tuned in is really helpful for reducing stress. It seems like it's the opposite, but it's not. So loss of time is another stressor. That's huge, right? People talk about this all the time. What happened to April? Like March was like the longest month of our lives, right? So these things, this is real. This is a real stressor to recognize what day is today. Like, I can't keep track of my week and the things that I have going on. The most important thing that we can do is stopping to notice where the sun comes up and how it shifts. Notice where the sun goes down and what's changing. Noticing the trees in my backyard have gone from bare twigs to tiny buds to now they're in full leaf and blooming, and those are changes that have happened over time. They help me track that I've been in the same space for months on end, but time is moving. And it's helpful for students, for children, for little ones to really notice, to have you point out. Again, routines are really helpful. Our loss of safety, that sense of like nowhere safe, no one is safe, convincing our children not to touch and not to be around people and not to go out in public and not to climb on the playground has been something that parents have been doing in various degrees of doing it well, because we're all making this up as we go along. So those children are both excited to come back to school, and when they arrive and see their teachers in masks, are going to be a little frightened. And we have to be aware that that loss of safety is a part of it. Now, they've been told over and over again, germs are everywhere, and we don't want to catch this deadly disease. And so to come into the school and be told, stay back, stay here, stay there, by someone who they really can't see smiling and they really can't see their faces is really, really difficult. And we have to be conscious. Children need physical touch. We all need physical touch. There are things that we can do, meditation and mindfulness, that we can do internally to support our sense of being touched and being connected and feeling safe. We can affirm one another verbally, and through these different mediums, we're learning more and more how to do that for each other, but acknowledging that we need it is really important. And a loss of sense of purpose is really, really a big stressor for everyone. If my job was to go out and be in this place and do these things, and now I'm not needed there and I can be furloughed, who do I become, right? And that's an issue for a lot of people, for teachers whose identity is wrapped up in how they love and care for young children, for directors and how they support and care for their communities and their parents and their children and their staffs, to feel that's been stripped from them because rules change every other day, because we can't possibly do all those things and be financially solvent. That loss is really difficult for us to struggle through. We need to affirm one another, and to be conscious of how we affirm our identity and what we can do to maintain agency. And actually, the current protests is a really powerful way to maintain a sense of purpose and a sense of agency. There are things that we can do, that we can remain safe, and we can do things to support our children, to support our communities, to support one another, to support ourselves as we struggle through these times. One of the things that VJ talked about is how our children will behave when they go back to school. And I want to point back to what Dr. Allen said earlier about our children that have been home and have been comfortable and have been culturally surrounded by their own, right? Their own sights, their own smells, people who look like them, who sound like them, who think like them, who value the same things. They've been immersed in that for all of this time, and coming back to a school where, or a center where they may be told, okay, that might have worked at home, but you're in school now, right? And we have school rules. We're stripping them of that identity. And it's important for us in centers as we move forward to recognize that some of these children are thriving because they haven't been in our systems, and that we have to be conscious of providing the co-regulation supports distantly, right? With a mask on. How are we doing that? And that's what we need to be supporting our staff with, and supporting parents in bringing that culture to the centers and saying, what's been successful for you at home with your child? What have they responded well to? We want to bring more of that to their center, rather than saying now they're back in their centers and it's time for us to do the things that we do in school. Because VJ as a parent shouldn't have that worry about how his children are going to be in school. The school should be worrying about how we're going to meet his children's needs. Sorry. Okay, next slide. And off on a little tangent. So some of the things that we can do to celebrate and build resilience in our children. Resilience isn't a thing that we're born with. It is definitely something that that can be supported. It's about the ability to bounce back from difficult times. We are in difficult times, and we need to build our ability to bounce back for ourselves as adults and also for our children. Some of the most important things we can do is just noticing and naming the emotions that come up, the feelings that come up, acknowledging. It's hard to leave your mom at the car, isn't it? You're used to them coming into the school to sign you in, but we're doing things differently now. Noticing and naming how those children are reacting, and identifying it for them, and acknowledging that it's okay, that it's right, that it's safe to feel those feelings and to express those feelings, and that we're going to work through them. Supporting that co-regulation, right? Helping children to regulate themselves by being there and being supportive. It requires us as adults to be regulated. That's difficult if we're stressed, if we're fearful, if we're experiencing trauma ourselves, if we're afraid of that family because we know that they were at a protest last night and now they're coming to the school and now I'm nervous. How am I available to support that child who's going through their own stress in transitioning to the school? So there's some things that we can do. So I turned it into ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. These are all stolen ideas, but just to condense it down to something simple. ABCs is awareness, balance, and connection. So we need to stay aware of ourselves, of our feelings, of what's going on around us, of the realities of the people around us. We need to stay aware of the resources that are available to us and stay in touch with all of those possibilities, right? And recognize that we're not just slipping back to schoolness and teaching ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. We really are coming back to a situation where reducing stress and supporting regulation is our primary purpose. That's our primary goal in this transition. So we need to stay aware. We need to stay balanced. Everyone needs to have a life outside of school. We cannot be 24/7 concerned with these concerns. We have to find that balance and be able to take the breaks that we need in order to rejuvenate ourselves so that we have the energy to support someone else. And we need to stay connected. We stay connected to ourselves, to our communities, to our families, to our friends, to each other, connected to something bigger than ourselves, right? So whether that's spiritual or religious or anything else that you do to stay connected to something beyond you is really essential to build your own resilience to bring to children and supporting children with all of these same things. So the 1, 2, 3s are things that we can do. Breathe. That's number one, breathe. When a child is flipping out, when you're flipping out inside and you want to control what's going on, when you feel like things are out of hand, when someone hands you a new regulation and you're not sure what to do with it, step one is breathe. Take those deep breaths, take those time to count and soothe and calm yourself. And I'm slipping right now into number 2, which is slow down. We want to slow down our thinking, our response, our voices, our rate of speech. We want to slow all of those things. And when it comes to children, we definitely want to get low. We tend, when we get excited, to start speaking in higher and higher registers and getting really excited and really intense about things. And we need to slow that down and literally lower our voices, lower our bodies. Get low, sit in a low chair, get low to the ground, get down on our knees. All of that helps to calm ourselves, and that co-regulates the child and helps to calm the child down. And number 3 is stop, drop, and roll. That's an easy one to remember. So when a child has us upset, when we're feeling really on edge and really flipping out, to just stop talking, stop talking. When a child is freaking out, they're not freaking out to upset you. They're not freaking out for any reason other than that's how they express, right? So they can't say, you know what, wine and chocolate cake for breakfast is a good plan today. I'm feeling really stressed and my stomach is in knots. What they say is, I don't feel good. And they have no other tools to express it. So they may scream, yell, holler. These are the things that we're going to have to face as children come back into centers. So step 1, stop. Stop, give that child some space. Don't respond when you're upset. Stop, drop down to their level. Drop down your voice, drop down your tempo, everything. Drop back from the situation and see if you can look at it a little bit differently and then roll with it. Let that child express. Let that situation unfold, acknowledge it, give it space, tell other children around, yes, it's a really hard day. How many other people are feeling this? This is really hard. The last thing that I want to say is, with regard to this, is just that currently we have the situation going on. We know intellectually that we need to be talking with our children every day about race. We need to make it a normal part of every day, right? We provide a nursing station in my classroom, and I have Band-Aids of all different colors because that triggers conversation. Children go to give each other a Band-Aid and they look and they start matching and they talk about race comfortably because it's normal and it's normalized in the classroom. So we need to talk about race every day. Right now, we need to talk about racism. And that's what Dr. Allen was talking about, making those conversations about fairness so that we are really pushing that conversation and talking about the things that a lot of our children are talking about at home and some of our children are not. And we have to provide spaces for that conversation because that will reduce the stress, and it will reduce the trauma. Okay, so next slide. So these are some opportunities that are out there. These are some things that MSU Denver is doing and can do to support centers and to support educators and children at this time. We provide tiered coaching and supports directly to providers and centers. We're providing professional development online, right? So we're doing this, Zoom meetings and conversations in small groups and with entire centers on self-care, on trauma-informed practices, on equity, on leadership for directors. We also provide avenues to career advancement through education. So we have Fresh Start. The university has Fresh Start program where past semesters can be ignored in order for you to enroll and get started. We have a post-bac program so that parents and adults that have decided, because they've spent this time at home with their children and they've been educating themselves to do this well, maybe they want to go work in a center and maybe they're interested in this and they can start back and go forward for licensure. We have our ECE program has credential stacking so that the first few courses that are taken can be for ECT qualifications. It builds over time. You can have director qualification over time with certain number of courses, the BA, and licensure. So there are all different levels that people can enter and do that. We also provide direct student support through our clinical experience placements. So we are partnering with schools and districts and providing training on trauma-informed practices and other opportunities. I know that Anna, I was going to ask Anna Joseph if she would talk about some of our TIP programs for pre-service teachers that we have going. Anna, if you're available.
Yep. Hi. Thank you, Dorothy. So hi, everyone. I'm just going to take a couple seconds right now just to talk a little bit about our Trauma-Informed Practices program. As Susan said, my name is Anna Joseph. I run that program at the School of Education. That initiative started in the 2018 to 2019 school year, and our goal is, Dean Hind had said this earlier, but our goal is to ensure that every student, regardless of the program they're in, graduates with the ability to recognize and address trauma in their future classrooms with their future students, in school settings, and also secondary traumatic stress in themselves and their coworkers. As we know, secondary traumatic stress is also a really significant issue that a lot of teachers struggle with as well. So with that initiative that started in that school year, we really just started by providing professional learnings on trauma-informed practices to School of Education students. And then we were able to grow the program thanks to the generous support of foundations such as the Buell Foundation. So thank you again, Susan, for that, to really grow our initiative. And now a really key component of it that we're in the process of doing is integrating trauma-informed practices into the entire School of Ed curriculum. So we ensure that our students learn how these competencies fit alongside their existing learning objectives. For us, we believe pretty firmly that students should learn how trauma-informed practices are intertwined and integral to how they practice all components of their profession, instead of just sort of keeping it as solely different professional learning series or just kind of a one-off class, because that can indirectly send a message that trauma-informed practices are maybe optional or supplemental or add-on, and that's not the message we want to send. We really want folks to know how this is fundamental and integral to all components of how you practice being a teacher. Other parts of the initiative, of course, involve providing lots of different learning opportunities for our faculty and for our staff to increase their own capacity to teach trauma-informed practices in their courses. We do also have faculty undergoing research as well on trauma-informed practices. And, you know, our goal is long-term to also really just grow this initiative so the School of Ed becomes a point of a learning community for all educators across the state and hopefully even maybe across the nation to learn about trauma-informed practices. Just a couple more things I wanted to say about it. So a really key partner in our work that I want to make sure I let everybody know about is a group called Resilient Futures. They're a local nonprofit focused on trauma-informed practices and education, and they are a key partner for us in this initiative. We could not do this work without them. They provide all of the professional learning series from day one. They provide consultation to faculty, and have just been a key thought partner in really developing this initiative and been with us from day one. So I'll put their information as well in the chat, but definitely recommend checking them out. As well, we also have a webpage as well for our trauma-informed practices. It is not, I'll say, totally finished. We're still going to be putting some resources up there, but I will put that webpage in the chat as well, so folks can access it. And I'll put my email as well. So if you do have more questions about this initiative, please reach out to me and let me know. And I'll hand it back over to you, Dorothy.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so I think we're going to turn it over to Liz at this point to talk about some of the opportunities to support MSU Denver.
In that case, then actually, Dorothy, we had one more question that came in while you were speaking. So the question is from Melissa English. It's, what are the rules, mandates, guidelines for teachers physically touching the children? For example, what do we do with a child we'd normally hug and physically hold during separation at morning drop-off? Not to speak of children who may have meltdowns during the day.
I'm going to ask if Dr. Allen can answer that, because when it comes to rules and regulations, she's our expert, and maybe she can help us with that.
This is a tough one because we're early childhood people and we know the importance of physical touch. There are no rules that say we cannot touch children. And there are going to be times that we need to, and that children need us to. I would ask that you follow all protocols possible. If you're wearing a mask and the child is wearing a mask, then the likelihood of spreading COVID is decreased. But there's no way on earth that we would codify hugs. So I say, go for it, be careful about it, wash your hands afterwards, and follow protocols. Dorothy, what might you add to that?
I think that's exactly right. I was afraid to say it and and have that be against protocol, but I cannot imagine being in a classroom with young children and someone having a breakdown and not being able, I mean, how do we co-regulate with children and not be able to acknowledge it? I might, from safely 6 feet away, point out that I have my mask on and ask that child to put their mask on and make sure that it's on, and then approach the child and comfort the child and say, let's go wash because we don't want to spread germs, after I've calmed them down, right? And go and wash our hands and calm ourselves down and maybe invite that child to wash their face, right? Whatever we would normally do, and then rejoin the group. And even have that conversation with the larger group about sometimes we have to get close to help each other out, but that we want to remember staying at that distance is helpful to not spread germs, right? That conversation, I think, is the support that gives us the permission to do what we are inclined to do, right? That's in our nature to do, that we know will help them and us, right?
It would feel neglectful not to.
Right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chaplin, Dr. Allen. I think words of wisdom, again, Dorothy, words of wisdom, not only for kids, but for interactions with adults. I heard some very important comments about self-care, about, put your own oxygen mask on first to make sure that you're okay to be able to do all of this work. And that's hard sometimes, but I think it's very important. Another thing I heard about is flexibility or responsiveness, that there may be all sorts of rules and we still need to be responsive to the situation, especially with kids, but also with other adults. And a third sort of lesson I thought I heard was something about, let's just assume positive intent and assume that everybody is doing the very best job they can do, even though it's maybe not perfect and maybe not exactly how we would do it. But it's certainly what we're all trying to do right now. And if we can maybe go into difficult circumstances with that in mind, it certainly helps open up the dialogue and the opportunities. Wonderful conversations, especially let's give kids hugs if they have to have them. That's an important one. Thank you so
And
much.
Susan,
Yeah.
sorry, we have one more quick question come in just while it sounds like if folks are interested, if Dr. Chaplin, Dr. Allen could speak to what about any sort of guidelines or thoughts they have, or if there are any, official mandates or rules in terms of children touching each other.
Keep in mind that the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, they have their guidance is their recommendations and their best practices. Just like Dr. Chaplin said, children are going to see each other and run and hug. I can't imagine traumatizing, don't touch your friends. I do believe that we can talk about some basic rules at circle time, the same way that we teach those other rules. We keep our friends safe. So if we wanted to highlight that rule, we keep our friends safe, we keep ourselves safe, we keep our things safe, that this is a great way to talk about how we have to keep our friends safe during these times. I would not want to see a child reprimanded or punished for hugging. It's so natural, but we can also remind them that we have to keep each other safe.
And I think an important piece of that is before we open, right? Being in contact, like VJ said, communication is essential. Being in contact with parents and having parents prepare their children that they're going to be asked to keep a distance from their teachers, to keep a distance from the other children. That doesn't mean they can never go near anyone else. It just means that they're going to be asked to do that in school. And if they're prepared ahead of time for that, they may think twice. They probably won't, but they may think twice about running to embrace everyone as they first arrive, right? So that's something that parents can help with, right? That we can solicit their support with through that communication ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. And we have to understand too that families are probably already talking about this. A lot of families are already talking about social distancing. There's a hiking trail behind my house. A little girl hugged her friend and gave her flowers. And the dad picked her up and ran her home and washed her hands and threw the flowers away. And now he said his daughter won't touch any flowers or go back on the hill. That traumatized the child. So we want to make sure that we're not operating in that extreme way out of fear, but knowing that families are probably practicing social distancing, and we can actually teach children a lot during that circle time.
Dr. Hine, why don't you finish us up?
Well, it's a hard act to follow, so I will be brief. This has been wonderful, and I want to thank you all, Susan and all our panelists and all the attendees who have come today. I will let you know, if you haven't noticed in the chat, this session was recorded and will be available on the School of Education website or social media, and we'll send a link to the recording to all the attendees soon in the coming days. And again, thank you for participating. This is such an important topic. We know that the experiences of our youngest children set the stage for future learning and success in schools and in life. So it really is in everyone's best interest, even society's, to boost our early childhood centers, support our incredible early childhood educators, those who are currently in the settings, and those like our students who are training to work in them will soon be in them. We want to provide our children the best and healthiest experiences that they can have. And we in the School of Education are committed to preparing excellent educators who are ready to meet the challenges that are facing early childhood education. As you can see, and as you've heard, there are a lot of challenges and issues ahead, but our faculty and our students are up to it. We could use your help though. If you are so inclined, we would appreciate any support you can offer to our Trauma Informed Practices Initiative, our students, or the School of Education overall. In the chat, there's a link to our School of Education page if you would like more information about us or to donate to this important cause. I'm Elizabeth Hine, Dean of the School of Education, and thank you for spending time with us. Have a good day.